Ideology remains relevant in our understanding of history, as it shapes our perceptions and how they shift over time. People often misunderstand new events as continuations of the past, or old events as new breaks, such as the collapse of Eastern Europe's socialist states. Critics of Marxism wrongly see today's capitalist society as something new beyond Marx's ideas. Ideology can mean anything from a false consciousness to beliefs that support power. It often appears where we try to avoid it and is missing where we expect it. For example, calling something ideological often means its opposite is also ideological. Seeing historical accidents as necessary or crises as random avoids recognizing systemic issues. Ideology hides true causes by externalizing what is internally necessary, and critique should reveal these hidden necessities. Stepping outside ideology can be another form of being trapped by it. The News Forum in East Germany was a case where ideology took itself seriously, believing in a third way beyond capitalism and socialism, risking everything for it. The critique of ideology has been a subject of ad hoc analyses, with the initial question focusing on the concept of ideology. This pre-comprehension has led to contradictory results, but is not underestimated. An ideology is not necessarily false, as its positive content can be true, or quite accurate. What really matters is the way this content is related to the subjective position implied by its own process of enunciation. The logic of legitimizing the relation of domination must remain concealed for it to be effective. One approach to explicating this implicit pre-comprehension is the Hegelian historical dialectical transposition of the problem into its own solution. This involves considering the topicality of the thought, the way a thought is inscribed into its object, or the way the frame itself is part of the framed content. The concept of ideology can be categorized into three main aspects: doctrine, belief, and ritual. Hegel distinguished these three moments, which can be interpreted as the complex of ideas, the materiality of ideology, and the spontaneous ideology, at work at the heart of social reality. Ideology is a systematically distorted communication, with a gap between its official meaning and actual intention, due to one of our social interests. The criticism of ideology emerged from discourse analysis, which focuses on the concrete intersubjective space of symbolic communication. This approach is not a complementary move to the traditional Enlightenment or Habermasian approach, but its inherent reversal. In the Enlightenment tradition, ideology stands for the blurred false notion of reality, caused by various pathological interests. For discourse analysis, the very notion of an access to reality, unbiased by any discursive devices or conjunctions with power, is ideological. Roland Barthes proposed the notion of ideology as the naturalization of the symbolic order, as the perception that reifies the results of discursive procedures into properties of the thing itself. Paul Demann's notion of theoresistance to deconstructionist theory also focuses on the discursive procedures that engender evidence of sense. Oswald Ducrot's theory of argumentation does not employ the term ideology, but has a tremendous ideologico-critical potential. Michel Picard who gave a strict linguistic turn to Althusser's theory of interpellation, focuses on the discursive mechanisms that generate the evidence of sense. One of the fundamental stratagems of ideology is the reference to some self-evidence, such as, "Look, you can see for yourself how things are." This is because facts never speak for themselves, but are always made to speak by a network of discursive devices. Discourse analysis is particularly effective in answering the question of how a racist Englishman perceives a lack or surplus, as it involves a symbolic universe. Ernsto Laclau's approach to fascism and populism posits that meaning does not inhere in elements of an ideology as such, but rather functions as free-floating signifiers, whose meaning is fixed by the mode of their hegemonic articulation. The Althusserian notion of ideological state apparatuses, ISA, designates the material existence of ideology in ideological practices, rituals, and institutions. The concept of ideology has been a subject of debate and analysis in recent years, with critics arguing that it is no longer a homogeneous mechanism that ensures social reproduction, but rather a Wittgensteinian family of connected and heterogeneous procedures. The concept of ideology has been a subject of debate for many years, with some arguing that it grows too strong and embraces everything, including neutral, extra-ideological ground. This suggests that the order of discourse is inherently ideological, as it can create depth by inverting the order of discourse. However, this approach can lead to the antinomy of critico-ideological reason, where ideology is not all and can be replaced by symbolic fictions rather than reality. The opposition between ideology and the state is a complex concept explored in various philosophical works, with the first manifestation provided by Plato and Aristotle, and its final expression in the form of consumerist, post-Protestant, late capitalist, and late real socialism cynicism. Late capitalism relied on argumentative persuasion and free consent, while socialism relied on totalitarian coercion. The key feature of late real socialism was the almost paranoid belief in the power of the word, which led to the state and ruling party reacting nervously to public criticism. This feature may have been due to the legacy of the Enlightenment, which believed in the social efficacy of rational argumentation. The matrix of these repetitions is the opposition between ideology as the universe of spontaneous experience and ideology as a radically non-spontaneous machine that distortions the authenticity of our life experience from outside. For Marx, the primordial mythological consciousness of pre-class society is not yet ideology proper, although it is immediately lived, and is clearly wrong and illusory. In contrast, Althusser conceives ideology as an immediately experienced relationship to the universe. As such, it is eternal. He introduces the concept of ISA, which he believes is regulated by the externality of state and its ideological apparatuses. This tension between spontaneity and organized imposition introduces reflective distance into the very heart of the notion of ideology, as ideology is always, by definition, the ideology of ideology. F. W. J. Schilling, the crucial philosopher of German idealism, critiqued pure spiritual idealism and its lifeless, negative nihilism in his Dialogue Clara, 1810, pointing out the double surplus between the spiritual element of corporeality and the corporeal element of spirituality, which are materializations of the spirit in pseudo-stuff, substanceless apparitions. Jacques Derrida introduced the term specter to describe the elusive pseudo-materiality that subverts the ontological oppositions of reality and illusion. Lacan explains that reality is always symbolized, constituted, and structured by symbolic mechanisms. The problem lies in the fact that symbolization ultimately fails and involves unsettled, unredeemed symbolic debt. This real, the part of reality that remains non-symbolized, returns in the guise of spectral apparitions. The Marxist concept of class struggle designates the antagonism that prevents objective social reality from constituting itself as a self-enclosed whole. Class struggle is a paradoxical concept that can be articulated through the Hegelian distinction between substance and subject. At substance, class struggle is conditional on the objective social process, acting as a secondary indication of fundamental discord. At the subject level, class struggle is always at work in the very heart of the objective process itself, as capitalists develop means of production to lower the relative and absolute value of the labor force. Class struggle is a paradoxical concept that can be articulated through the Hegelian distinction between substance and subject. It is not possible to isolate any objective social process or mechanism whose innermost logic does not involve the subjective dynamics of class struggle. The status of class struggle can be compared to that of the Hitchcockian MC Giofin, who argues that there is no struggle between classes. The notion of class struggle, qua antagonism, allows us to contrast the real of antagonism with the complementary polarity of opposites. This reduction of antagonism to polarity is one of the elementary ideological operations. In science, there are not two sciences that are not affected by class struggle, but rather one that is the struggle for who will appropriate it. Discourse is also divided by sexual antagonism, providing the terrain on which the battle for hegemony takes place. The concept of ideology and ideological state apparatuses, ISA, refers to the concrete network of material conditions of existence of an ideological structure. However, it often overlooks the undecidable complex totality of contradiction. In Heidegger's Being and Time, the concept of and is tautological, conjoining the same content in its two modalities, first in its ideological evidence, and then in the extra-ideological conditions of its existence. This interpretation of social antagonism, class struggle, as real, not as part of objective social reality, enables us to counter the worn-out line of argumentation, according to which one has to abandon the notion of ideology. The concept of ideology and ideological state apparatuses can help understand the complex relationship between ideology, social antagonism, and the construction of social reality. By addressing the traumatic kernel of antagonism and the need for a balanced symbolic structure, we can better understand the dynamics of social relations and the role of ideology in shaping our understanding of social spaces. Common sense suggests that a clear view of reality can be obtained by examining a village from above, but this overlooks the real of social antagonism. expressed in distortions of reality. Latel argues that distortion and dissimulation are revealing, as what emerges via distortions of the accurate representation of reality is the trauma around which social reality is structured. This paradox implies that if all inhabitants of a village had the same accurate ground plan, they would be dealing with a non-antagonistic, harmonious community. The fundamental paradox implied by commodity fetishism involves two different actual villages, each realizing one of the two fantasized ground plans. Evoked by Levi Strauss, the structure of social reality materializes an attempt to cope with the real of antagonism, and this real, foreclosed from the symbolic fiction, returns in the form of spectral apparitions. The problematic of ideology has led to a return to Marxism, emphasizing the centrality of social antagonism, class struggle. 10 Balabar's recent work provides the best answer to this result, stating that the idea of a theory of ideology was only ever a way ideally to complete historical materialism, filling a hole in its representation of the social totality. Psychoanalysis can effectively play this key role of providing the missing support of the Marxist theory of ideology, or accounting for the very lack in the Marxist theory that becomes the apropos of the deadlocks in the theory of ideology.